Thank you. It's good to be back at Leadership Institute. And I also want to note when my real graduate school in Washington here was probably working for Bob Novak. And Novak, a lot of you guys know, he was on the opinion page, but he always did reporting. Every one of his columns had newly reported facts. I don't think I live up to that standard, but I sort of use him as a guidepost where I have my opinions and I do my reporting. And my opinions are I'm a conservative. I also describe myself as a libertarian, and some people wonder if those two things can coexist. I love that debate. That's one of my favorite things. But I believe in free markets. And one of the things my reporting has brought me across is the fact that the single greatest threat to free enterprise in America today is the big business lobby. It's not Ralph Nader. It's not, the Soviet Union. That's gone. The hard left that wants to socialize industry has sort of been pushed into the back, and the Democrats have realized that their best way to gain power and gain power over the economy is to work together with big business. And so the biggest threat to free enterprise in America today, again, is the big business lobby. They're dangerous because, well, unlike the far left, the big business lobby often wins. The far left pushes for things like a socialized health care. They don't get it. Big business pushes for stuff like mandatory purchase of health insurance for everybody, subsidies for prescription drugs, new rules that force us to buy products we don't want. Big business wins. Big business wins. Big business is the biggest threat to economic liberty also because they fool people. They fool the mainstream media and they fool the right. So first of all, the mainstream media will say, well, we got to look at both sides of this regulation debate. First, let's talk to the left. And the left says, oh, we need regulations. And then let's ask the people being regulated. And then they go and they ask Enron. Oh, well, you guys are the biggest energy company in America back in 2001. And Enron says, well, actually, we support these global warming rules. And so the press says, I guess there's unanimity. Even business supports it. So they fool the press. But even worse than that, they fool Republicans. My friend Norm Singleton is here, and he would tell me about all these Republican members who said, I used to oppose that rule, that new labor rule, but then Walmart came and they said they could live with a higher minimum wage, so why should I be against it? Well, Walmart doesn't actually pay minimum wage. They pay $11. They supported the minimum wage hike in 2006. They can afford the higher wages. To the degree they do pay minimum wage to people, they can find ways to use their economies of scale. Who does pay minimum wage? It's mom and pop. So they are getting the credit from the left and the media for supporting the minimum wage with the little side benefit of kneecapping their smaller competitors. But one of the most recent stories is the light bulb story. The way the light bulb law came about, it started off with a couple congressmen, Fred Upton, a Republican, and he teamed up with a Democrat, and Upton's from Michigan, and they said, well, these energy-efficient light bulbs, they save a lot of money, so why don't we get the government to use them? And over the long run, this will save money. Sensible idea. Probably actually a bad idea because they installed all the energy-efficient ones in 2007 when they cost a lot more and were less efficient than the ones are today, the LEDs. But it was still a sensible idea. They passed that bill. And then the Democrat comes back to Upton and says, we got this going in the government. Why don't we push this on the private sector? And Upton says, you mean make it illegal for people to buy regular old incandescents? Why would we do that? Well, in the end, Upton co-sponsored the provision to push this on the private sector, eventually outlaw the regular incandescent light bulb. And he didn't really have to answer it until after this last election when he was in line to become chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And there's a lot of pushback. Why should we let this guy who took away our light bulbs be the Republican chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee? And I talked to a reporter who asked him, he said, why did you support the light bulb ban? He said, I didn't at first, but then GE and Sylvania and Philips all said that they were fine with it, so I figured it was okay. Even the industry supports this regulation. How can you be so unreasonable as to oppose it? Well, guess what? The regular old light bulb that Thomas Edison invented, GE and those guys, they didn't really improve on it for about 100 years. And their profit margins were tiny. And this is a beautiful thing of the free market, right? There wasn't that much competition. There was a triopoly, if that's a word. There was 3 of them. They couldn't raise their prices, though. Why? Because the tungsten, the glass, a little bit of metal in there, all that stuff was so cheap and so easy to come by. And the manufacturing process was so simple and way out of patent since Thomas Edison lost his patent on that. If they had tried to hike up their prices, somebody else would have come in and undercut them. And Walmart probably would have ordered all their light bulbs from that guy. Maybe Walmart would have started making the light bulbs. That's what competitive pressure does. Even when the competition isn't so fierce, it brings down the prices so that we were getting the light bulbs at a penny more than GE was paying to make them. But that's no fun for GE, right? They want higher profit margins. So they gave us the soft white light bulbs, which are a little nicer, fine. But then the competitors came in, and again, the profit margins dropped. So they said, we're going to make high-tech light bulbs that are much more energy efficient and that last much longer. And that's great. And there are lots of places where that makes sense. You know, a parking garage or some place where it's really expensive to get up and change the light bulb. You want it to last longer. But for the regular person, it just wasn't that convincing. I mean, I know for me, I've got 5 kids. A light bulb's not going to last 20 years no matter what it's made out of. And so unless, the Democrats are going to come in and outlaw football in the House or something like that. But so they couldn't get a lot of people to buy their high profit margin bulbs. So they outlawed the low profit margin bulbs. And then GE put out this priceless press release and said, well, due to regulations in America and in Europe, we have to close our factory in Winchester, Virginia that makes bulbs that are now outdated. They never mentioned that those regulations were supported by, in fact, partly written by General Electric and their industry lobby. So this, again, business is the biggest threat to free enterprise. Obamacare would have failed if the drug industry and the hospital industry had not gotten on board. If you remember the summer of 2009, all these Democrats were going home to their town halls and just getting terrified, getting screamed at, not just by, the crazy pitchfork-wielding conservatives there, but by regular people who said, why are you going to change my health care? What is this you're going to force me to do? And they were on the ropes. Obama came back in September and gave a speech where he, A, finally supported the individual mandate that the insurers had demanded, but B, over that summer, he sat down with Billy Tozan, former Republican member of Congress, also a former Democratic member of Congress, very flexible man. And he said, and Tozan sat down at the White House, head of the drug lobby, and he said, look, let's make a deal. And they made a good deal. And they mandated that they've pushed they pushed insurers to have to cover more name brand drugs even when generics are available. They had tons of subsidies in there for drug companies. The insurance that you have to buy has to include fairly expansive drug coverage even if you don't want it. And they kept in the things that Obama had promised. Obama said he was going to get rid of, he was going to allow reimportation from Canada, and then finally said, no, we're going to get rid of that. And they cut a deal. And the drug industry agreed to run millions of dollars of ads supporting any Democratic senator whose reelection was endangered by voting for Obamacare. So Harry Reid is in the U.S. Senate today because the drug industry went to bat for him. And the hospital industry, too. And even after the bill passed, the insurers didn't love it, but after the bill passed, the insurers went to work state by state, pushing states to adopt the exchanges and expand Medicaid. The insurers, Blue Cross Blue Shield, filed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court to defend the individual mandate. This law would not have become law if the hospitals and the drug industry had not supported it. It's not just a question that they didn't oppose it. If they had just said, look, we're going to sit this one out, the Democrats would have lost their nerve in the fall of 2009, and the law would have died. And you just see it across the board on all sorts of issues. The stimulus had the support of the Chamber of Commerce. And today, right now, what's the fight that's going to happen this fall? It's over the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Now, Lauren had asked me what got me onto this beat, and it was an editor, Terry Jeffrey, when I was at Human Events, called me into his office, and he said, I just found out there's a government, and I'm a 21-year-old cub reporter. He says, I just found out there's a government agency called the Export-Import Bank. And I was confused. I said, so is it a government agency or is it a bank? He said, I don't know exactly what it is. Look into it. And so I started reading about it, and I said, wait a second. Our government has an agency that loans money to foreign companies so they'll buy stuff made here, or guarantees like a Citibank loan to a foreign company so that they'll buy stuff made here. And that a vast majority of their loan guarantees, not just a plurality, but most of their loan guarantees subsidize Boeing sales. I love Boeing. I love American companies. I think Boeing planes are kind of better than Airbus planes now that I've been studying this. I don't think Boeing needs its own government-run bank. I don't think our government should be doing this. And also, this again is the danger. When Republicans try to talk about free enterprise, say, we believe in free enterprise, leave these businesses alone. They did build that, but they need taxpayer-backed loan guarantees to sell their planes to foreign governments. No. Saudi government or Arab state-owned airlines buying a plane from Boeing, which has its own financial arm, when the loan is coming from Citibank, those are three big boys in that room. They should be able to take care of themselves. They shouldn't need us behind them. But yet, Republicans talk in the morning about free enterprise and then vote in the afternoon for corporate welfare, and then they wonder why people think Republicans just care about the rich. I think free enterprise and free markets and limited government is and ought to be a philosophy about the little guy. It ought to be about the fact that you can get ahead. In a free market, the mighty are cast down and the lowly are lifted up all the time. We have the freest market. If you look at the Fortune 500 today as opposed to 50 years ago, there's a few people who did this study after Thomas Piketty's book says, oh, there's no income mobility. And they said there's only like 50 people in the Fortune 500 today who were there 15 years ago. Everybody else gets thrown out and tossed out on their heads. And those 50 people aren't people who inherited their money for the most part. They were self-made people who then, after they got rich, did something else that kept them becoming rich. Now, I wouldn't do that. If I got a little bit of rich, I would, be a full-time stay-at-home dad and playing golf and that sort of stuff. But thank God America's not made up of people like me. It's made up of people who, after they make a ton of money, say, now what other great invention can I do? And so, and the regular guy is not going to become a billionaire, but he can become a successful businessman. But guess what? New business formation is now at an all-time low. America's still the best country in the world, but we're not as good as we have been. And maybe this doesn't sound bad at first, but businesses exiting the market is also at an all-time low. And that sounds good if you're one of those businesses, if you're a CEO of an ancient business. But if you believe in creative destruction, you know that it takes the exit of big guys for new guys to come in. But bailouts and regulations, slowly growing, keep those guys protected. Again, you see the clear difference between pro-business and pro-markets. Because pro-business doesn't mean in favor when these guys say it in Washington, when the lobbyists say it. It doesn't mean I'm in favor of businesses being able to compete and sell and buy and invest. It means I'm in favor of these specific incumbent businesses that I can name. That was never supposed to be what pro-business means, but in the minds of many Republicans it is. So the bad news is that the regulatory state, the bailout state, is growing, and these guys are all protected. The good news is that Republicans have started to wake up to it, and that there is, in fact, a civil war in the GOP today. The vote over the Export-Import Bank, if there were a floor vote in the House or the Senate, it would pass right now. But the Republicans would be split about 50-50. That means and Obama said it the other day. He said, since when is giving, I mean, he didn't put it this way, but he said, since when is giving lots of money to Boeing something Republicans oppose? And that's a good question. Now, the first half of that answer is there always were Republicans who opposed it. Of course, there was always Ron Paul in the House, but there were about 30 other guys. I remember in the 2002 House vote on Exim, there were 30 guys, and it included guys like Tom DeLay and Dick Armey. Now, they didn't whip the party against it, but they voted no. But so there always have been some guys who understood, who were smart enough to know that when business came and said, well, we're free enterprise, but in this case, no, there were always a few. But if we're going to get up to, we could get 130, 140 House votes, no. You've got the chairman of the House Financial Services opposes Export-Import Bank. The House Majority Leader said he opposes the Export-Import Bank. Since when did that happen? I think it starts with the bailout. I think it starts in 2008 when George W. Bush, in his words, abandoned his free market principles to save the free market. I think that was the first step. I think it was when we all looked at the FEC data after the 2008 elections and realized that big business across the board supported Barack Obama more than it supported George W. Bush. Even the 5 biggest oil companies, Exxon, Chevron, those 5 biggest oil companies, if you look at donations from them, even they supported Obama more than they supported McCain in that election. So that was step number 2. Then the stimulus backed by the Chamber of Commerce. Then Obamacare passing with the drug companies and the hospitals, and later on the insurers. This showed the Republicans that a lot of Republicans who were paying attention, that guess what? Big business was not necessarily their friends. One day, Congressman Paul, I'll talk briefly about my books because it relates to this and it relates to the story. The Big Ripoff I wrote in 2006. I feel like I'm a public radio station because I said it won awards, but nobody bought it. So it was a complete commercial failure, but it was, critically acclaimed. One reason nobody bought it is because it wasn't something people were talking about. I remember a radio host said he wanted to book me, and then he said, so I want you to have a debate, but I can't tell whether you're a conservative or a liberal. I'm like, I basically call for abolishing the minimum wage in my book. Why would I be a liberal? It's like, well, yeah, because you also say something critical of Walmart in there. So I can't really put you against a liberal. That would be an unfair debate. Then in 2009, I wrote Obamonomics, same theme, but mostly about Obama's first year. And Congressman Paul had me in his office to brief, to talk to some of his fellow Republican members. And he just sends out an email, and a few people show up, and there's sandwiches. And there were about 9 congressmen there. 3 of them just showed up for the sandwiches, I'm sure. 3 of them showed. Ron Paul and 2 others were there because they really understood and they cared about this topic. And 3 others showed up because that morning they had gotten their scorecard from the Chamber of Commerce. And one of them walked in and said, I do not understand how I get voted down for opposing spending on green energy. And I said, okay, this is what I'm here to explain to you. And he said, no, I'm making the free enterprise vote, the limited government vote, and the Chamber of Commerce is giving me a demerit for this. This doesn't make sense to me. Again, in their mind, they had believed what the mainstream media still believed, which was that pro-business and pro-free market were the same thing. And one of the guys at that breakfast, Phil Gingrey, again, he was there just for the food. And then when they were going after Solyndra a few years later, Democrat Ed Markey said, so wait, let me get this straight. We oppose loan guarantees to energy companies? And Gingrey pipes up, says, oh, I know where you're going with this. Don't you dare compare some tin horn solar company like Solyndra to a great company like Southern Company, which, produces these nuclear power plants and employs all these people and is really profitable. And so Markey correctly says, all right, so the rule is if you're a small company, you can't get support from the government, but if you're big and profitable, then you get the corporate welfare? And Gingrey was very satisfied that he had explained it so clearly to Congressman Ed Markey. Again, you see the problem. It poisons the debate. It makes it impossible to trickle out to the media and the regular people that it's clear that free enterprise isn't the defense of the big guys who are successful. It's, in fact, a threat to a lot of the big guys who are successful. And I think that needs to get across. I think that for free enterprise to succeed, you need more basically you need some populism on the right. Now, I know populism has a bad history, and populism on the right has often been tied to racism and ugly things in the past. So, you've got to always be wary about the idea of populism. But no, when Mitt Romney is going out and he's standing for the Republican Party by saying, we're never going to get this 47% because they don't make enough to pay federal income taxes. First of all, he calls them freeloaders. I think keeping your own money doesn't count as freeloading, and if you say that keeping your own money counts as freeloading, well, that puts you on the left because they think everything belongs to the state. So that was one of the false premises of Romney's 47% remark. But the other was the idea that the working person has no interest in free enterprise and limited government. when really that's a person who should want it the most. That's a person who ought to say, I want these barriers to entry stripped away. And look at the work that you have Institute for Justice doing, where they say, wait a second, you can't do hair braiding in the District of Columbia without like a cosmetologist degree, which involves $1,000 of training and then passing a test administered by the incumbent cosmetologist. And that's the sort of thing that slowly starts to convince the liberals, not the hardcore liberals, but some of the liberals, wait a second, maybe I need to be more wary of government. But more importantly, it convinces sort of the undecided guy in the middle that regulation isn't the tool that government uses to protect the regular guy from big business. It's a tool that government uses to protect big business from the regular guy. Uber, which is now a fairly big and successful business, had to break in by beating monopoly regulations on the local level that protect the monopoly. Uber is you use your smartphone to call a taxi, and the cabs are like, but wait a second, or to call basically a off-duty limo driver, and the taxi said, wait a second, we can't compete with this because they create all these efficiencies, and we have all these inefficiencies, so they can undercut us. That's not fair. And so many local governments agreed with them. Uber started winning, and you saw liberals start agreeing with the free enterprise argument. So my friend Dave Freddoso, the editorial in the Washington Examiner, he said, we have finally figured out how to turn an urban progressive into a libertarian for a day. You threatened to regulate his limousine service. It's always my best applause line, and it's somebody else's line. And it's the same thing happens with food trucks. Guess who's pushing to regulate the food trucks? It's the brick and mortar restaurants. Again, their argument is, we have these overhead costs. They're so much more efficient. That's unfair. And there are Republican politicians on the local level who say, look, I'm for free enterprise, but these are established businesses. These are legitimate business. We need to protect them. And again, that's pro-business. That's protectionism. That's not pro-free enterprise. So until that becomes more clear, it's hard for free enterprise to win. So the battle today is over the heart and soul of the Republican Party. Because there will be some on the left who will come around on this, but they'll always be a minority. You need to have the Republican Party say to business, you guys will follow us, okay? We're with you on taxes. We're with you on some regulations. You guys are going to follow us, and you're going to stop pushing for stuff like the stimulus. Yesterday in Michigan, Justin Amash, libertarian Republican, beat a challenger who was literally put up by the Chamber of Commerce, and he beat him pretty handily. You had Mike Pompeo in Kansas a clap for Amash. That was great. Amash's sins on his chamber scorecard included voting against Export-Import Bank, voting for unfunded highway bills, that sort of thing. Mike Pompeo, a good Republican from Kansas, he's from Boeing's district, and he voted against the Export-Import Bank, and he opposed earmarks. And so former Congressman Todd Tiahrt came back and challenged him, saying, we need to be more reasonable. We need to deal with business. And Pompeo won that primary last night, too. And there are other cases. In 2010, you had Ted Cruz was opposed by K Street. He won. Mike Lee ran against bailout Bob Bennett in 2010, and he won. You had Trey Grayson in Kentucky, who was backed by all of K Street, and Rand Paul was backed by just a couple crazy libertarian kids, and Rand Paul won. And so slowly, this battle is being taken up. Both sides are taking it up. The Chamber of Commerce is digging in its heels. Now, I wish the Chamber of Commerce didn't do that. I think the Chamber of Commerce should stand for free enterprise because they say they stand for free enterprise and they stand for it a majority of the time. And I think they should be consistent because I think the argument for business has to be a moral one. Ultimately, this is what it comes down to. And more, my libertarian friends who sometimes get worried when I start talking about morality, more and more they are realizing that the argument for markets and for free enterprise has to be a moral one. We're not doing this because it's good for the bottom line of a company, no. We're doing it because the pursuit of profit is good for all of society, and it's good on an individual level for your soul if it's done within the context of free and open competition. This will be, I want to take questions, whether it's on the current state of play or journalism or anything, but this will sort of be my final comment here. In free and open competition, if you're going to get ahead, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to build up the trust of your customers. You're going to have to develop the trust of your investors. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to treat your employees well. Free and open competition fosters virtues. In a cronyist system, how are you going to get ahead? You have to suck up to the people in power. You have to keep out your competitors. You often end up lobbying against your customers. For instance, say you're the life insurance industry that lobbies to save the death tax so that people have to, so that your wealthy customers have to buy your estate planning things. That's where the pursuit of profit ends up being the sort of liberal stereotype of business, right? That these people are hurting people, extracting wealth from society. In free and open competition, you are helping society and developing virtues. You need a moral argument for free enterprise, and it needs to be a consistent argument, because otherwise it ends up being what the left says it is, which is just a defense of big business. And that's not a noble undertaking. That's not something to devote your time to. Just like I said about Exim, you know, if you've got Boeing, the Bank of China, Air China, and JP Morgan in a room, they ought to be taking care of themselves. They don't need the government's help. Big business, if it's under attack with unfair regulations and taxes, yes, we ought to defend them. But when they're out trying to make a profit, the whole point is they ought to be able to do it on themselves, by themselves. So the people who believe in free enterprise need to say, we are for enterprise. We are for business. We are not for businesses. We are for your ability to try to compete in the marketplace, to try to sell me something that I want to buy. We are not for your profit. That's your business. The civil war in the Republican Party right now, I think it's getting exciting. It's getting fun. I have confidence that in the long run, the Republicans will come around to being a more consistent party of free enterprise. And at that point, the average American can look at the Republicans and say, maybe these guys aren't just the party of the rich. But more important, the average American can look at free enterprise and say, this is the system and the philosophy that best serves me. So thank you very much.